Well, the obvious question is compared to what? When people ask me that question, they're usually thinking, well, I no longer have absolutely perfect credit the way Bill Gates does. And my question at that point is, well, exactly where's your credit right now? If you're considering bankruptcy, it's probably tanked. And I have found that my clients' credit scores improve as a result of bankruptcy. Now, this is a little counterintuitive because you think, my goodness, they see I've gone through a bankruptcy. Will I just be a horrible risk and I'll never be able to get credit again? Well, unless you had phenomenal credit going into the bankruptcy, and once in a great while I'll have somebody who has a lot of debt, has been able to service it, but things have fallen apart, and it's just a matter of time before it all comes down. The person decides, I'm just going to file the bankruptcy, and right now you've got great credit. That's going to hurt the credit some. But for the most part, it improves credit, and it's primarily for two reasons. Now, I'm going to focus for just a little bit on Chapter 7. And again, this is in the personal context because businesses are really not thinking in terms of how their credit scores are, because that really is not a meaningful thing in that context. There is an analogous sort of thing, but really this is for personal finances. Okay, number one, if you go through a Chapter 7, what have you just done? You've gotten rid of a whole bunch of debt. That frees up future income to pay on future debts. That means if you borrow money from somebody, they don't have to worry about competing against a whole army of other creditors with their hands out asking for your future income. The second factor that comes up is in the bankruptcy code itself. And this is in section 727, if you're at all curious, 727A. 727 is the section under which people get a Chapter 7 discharge. And it says that if you've done a prior Chapter 7 and you got a discharge, you can't file another Chapter 7 to get a discharge until 8 years and a day have passed. Well, creditors know this. They're not stupid. And they know then that if you incur this new debt, you're not going to be able to use a Chapter 7 bankruptcy to wipe that new debt out. You will have to pay the debt. So not only is there no one else competing for your money in payments, but you're not going to be able to get rid of that new debt. You become more attractive to creditors rather than less. So chances are really quite good that your credit score will go up. It will improve rather than fall apart. Now, things are a little different in other chapters. In Chapter 13, you enter into a debt repayment plan that's administered by the bankruptcy court. So over time, typically, well, it can be 3 years, but most cases it's a 5-year plan. You're going to be paying your debts. So technically, you haven't gotten a discharge until you've completed the plan. And sometimes people don't complete their plans and they don't get that discharge. So as a result, creditors tend to sort of wait in the wings, checking things out. Are you making your plan payments? Or was this just a frivolous filing just to temporarily stop a foreclosure sale, something like that? Well, if you have been making the payments over time, then usually about a year or so in, you'll start getting offers for credit cards. Now, the initial balances are not going to be particularly high, and the interest rates will be a bit high, but it is a way to get started. But technically, you won't know exactly how things have panned out until you get the discharge, because it's that discharge that suddenly makes you more attractive to creditors rather than less. Chapter 11 is a much more complicated process. I have had a few individual debtors that have done personal Chapter 11s, but they're somewhat unusual. But it's similar in spirit to Chapter 13 in that you have this multi-year debt repayment plan. And so the creditors will check you out to see, are you a good risk? But ultimately, if you can convince a creditor of your credit worthiness, you will be able to borrow money and get credit. Now, sometimes you need to have a sweetener. That sweetener might be, well, you have to pay a higher interest rate to mitigate the risk that the creditor is assuming in lending you money. And if you're interested in getting something and taking out a loan to make a purchase, in other words, to incur a secured debt, well, the more you have in the game, more skin you have in the game, the more likely the creditor is to lend you the money. So, for example, if you were going to buy a house, and I've had this happen in Chapter 13, where I've had in more than one case, client wants to buy a house. You might think, wait a minute, you're currently in a bankruptcy case and you're going to buy a house? Well, you can sweeten things with a large down payment. And generally, it's not the debtor that comes up with the down payment. It might be the parents. So the parents come up with this nice, juicy down payment. Now the creditor sees, yes, you've got some skin in the game, and they'll lend you the money. You still have to get the court to approve it. You don't get to willy-nilly incur large amounts of debt while you're in a bankruptcy case. But as long as things work out, and let's say in the instances where this has happened, the monthly payments on the new mortgage were right about the same as what the monthly payments were on the rent. So it didn't adversely affect any of the other creditors or the structure of the Chapter 13 plan. So those tend to be somewhat non-controversial. So there's a situation where a person can get a large loan while still in a bankruptcy. Those were Chapter 13s. And something that's more routine that comes up with some regularity in Chapter 13 is the need to buy a new car. Because after all, we're talking about a 5-year plan. Unless you've just got a brand new car shortly before filing, the chances are that over that 5-year period, the car is going to start to give up the ghost and you're going to need to get a new car. So we file a motion for authority to incur debt. It's the same sort of thing as to buy the house, although that is much rarer. And we have to lay out the terms of the loan and show that, yes, you got to have the car. Because if you don't have the car, you're not going to be able to get to work. You're not going to be able to continue servicing the plan. That appeals to the self-interest of the creditors and looks good to the judge. But there is a little bit of a wrinkle there. If you're going to get a car and you're going to be making monthly payments on that car, that's going to take money away from your Chapter 13 plan payments. So we typically have to simultaneously file a motion to modify the plan due to changed circumstances to reduce plan payments to accommodate those new car payments. But again, as long as it's reasonable, I've had good success with that sort of pair of motions. So the long and short of it is, how will it affect your credit? Most of the time, it will improve your credit. It's not going to be completely rechristinated, but it'll be in much better condition than it was before you filed the bankruptcy case. So again, you have to look realistically at this. One final comment on that, I have somebody call up. I've got $50,000 worth of general unsecured debt. Say it's all credit card debt. But if I file a bankruptcy, is that going to affect my credit? Well, let's see. If you get rid of $50,000 worth of credit card debt, that's going to improve your credit a whole lot more than what bankruptcy might do to adversely affect your credit. So bankruptcy generally is a good thing for credit rather than a bad thing.